right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of our Africa Day workshops and celebrations today. Okay, we are all set for part 2. I'm going to hand it over to our moderators, Lillian, Savannah, and Austin Agro. But before I do, our Vice Chancellor of Student Affairs is back with us, and she'd like to, we'd like her to say a few words of welcome. Vice Chancellor Karen Perez-Munoz.
Good night, everybody. As some of you have met me this morning earlier, you were here this morning. I shared some words at the beginning of the day. But as you conclude your night and your celebration, because I think you're here to not only celebrate each other, but to celebrate your influence and your presence and this day of a long journey of hard work. On behalf of the Chancellor, Marcelo Orozco, Suarez Orozco, I want to say that thank you to everybody who's been here all day, who worked really hard. The students work really hard to represent who they are and what they do, and how proud we are of the Chancellor Cabinet of this event. And please enjoy the rest of the night. Please share some memories. And I'm here because of your speaker, so I can't wait to hear her as well. I'm excited, and for one of the reasons, not only because of Dean Kiki, but also I can't wait to hear your speaker, and that's why I'm here too as well. So please do have a good night and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor Perez-Munoz, for those opening remarks. Welcome everyone once again to the Gala part of the event. So the next coming is Lerato Motwarakole, and she's going to be introduced to us by Professor Bano. Professor Bano, you have the floor.
Thank you. I feel like I do have to preface this by saying I am going to butcher some names. I apologize for the names. But one thing I do want to say before I start, there's a whole Senate chamber right here. It's like going to see Mr. Smith goes to Washington. So you can act out all of your movie readings. I was an American government kid, so I was that type of stuff. All right. Welcome everyone to the Gala event. I want to introduce our keynote speaker. It is a pleasure. I've seen her in some of her movies and some of her shows, so it's actually incredible to hear her speak tonight. So I'm just going to read her bio, and then I'm going to pass it on over to our speaker. Loretta graduated with honors from the prestigious and highly competitive University of Cape Town Hidden School of Drama. She's recipient of the UNT Yvonne Banning Award for acting and was nominated for a Florida Cup Theatrical Award, Nadia Theater Award, and a Canada Award for Best Supporting Actress. She's appeared in shows like SABC2, I apologize. BBC Diamond Witness, ETV's Amazing Love, Eurocorp, Jen Kuno Film, Flight of the Storks, in South Africa's highest rated program, Generations. In 2015, supported by Tony and Melody Foundation, ventured into the entrepreneurial world to meet the demand of the growing creative community in Africa. She holds a master's degree from Harvard. Her research focused on mentorship, art and education, policy, entrepreneurship, cultural contextualized education, constructivism, theories of multiple intelligence. Upon graduating Harvard University, Upon graduating, Harvard University employed her as teaching fellow and media fellow. At Harvard, she spearheaded various projects, including a collaboration between Harvard University and the African Center of Excellence for Genomics and Infectious Disease. In 2013, Loretta returned home to start Obra the a creative consultancy. I apologize for that. That's your business. I should remember. I apologize. Okay. A creative consultancy that facilitates and promotes the global circulation of cutting-edge pedagogies. Clients have included British Council for Southern African Arts, Brazil Project Space, Screen Ocean, Harvard Center for African Studies, Pras de Lemo, Obrala's team of advisors include cultural producers, Gordon Nasty, and Nelson McConnell. Current projects include developing the Harvard African Art Initiative for the Harvard Center for African Studies and being the lead tour for the Bank of Botswana's art collection. Loretta is board member of the Harvard Center for African Studies, Leadership Council, and the National Arts Council of Botswana. So please, let's give her a
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. I wish I could see you all, but I can't. But thank you so much to Dr. Bono for the lovely introduction and the beautiful pronunciations. I would love to extend my profound appreciation to the Africa Scholars Forum within the McCormack Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies at the University of Massachusetts Boston campus, of course. I've wrote down all your names, so Augustine, Charlotte, Balkisa, Gifty, Amado. I've been watching the whole day. Dennis, Bobby, James, and everybody who worked tirelessly together to put this incredible, quite multi-layered event together. And to the Masters of Ceremony, I hope all is still in order. Oh, so you can hear me now. Okay, great. To the Master of Ceremonies, Lillian and Nkasi, alongside of Augustine, of course. Thank you for steering this ship the whole day. And I think it's going to be quite an incredible gala dinner with the events happening later on. So yeah, it's been a deeply inspiring and thought-provoking day. To Dean Madame Edozier, the provost, the vice chancellors, directors, professors, thank you all once again, and all protocol observed. I'm sure I'm revealing my diplomatic and government mind here with the protocols, but it's quite important to acknowledge all of you and to thank you for the invitation. I'm sad I could not be there physically, but with my schedule, I just couldn't allow for that wiggle room. I actually need to be asleep in 3 hours, be asleep and up in 3 hours. It's quite late this side in Southern Africa. When I received the invitation to speak at today's gathering, I just couldn't help but reflect on my own education and entrepreneurial journey just to get to this point. So I sort of see this as an exercise or a continuous dialogue in holding myself and my industry and the work that I do accountable in terms of the due diligence that we all need to partake in and assess as we continue to craft and create the world in which we want to live in, right? So just a bit of background, I'm based in a tiny country of 2 million people named Botswana in Southern Africa. But the work that I do spreads across to South Africa, Nigeria, Boston. So it's regional, it's continental, and in some respect, it is global. It's quite funny, every time I attend a conference, we often get told that Botswana is too quiet and that we need to speak up. So here I am. So there are sort of smaller countries within the continent that are making their marks. I rather notoriously don't like PowerPoint presentations because in Botswana, when you are speaking to the public or the citizens about their concerns, we use what we call the Khotla system. And all that is required within the Khotla system is a mic to ensure that you're audible, and just your words. A Khotla for us in Botswana is a very important traditional law gathering sort of council, a meeting place and system in my country, where community decisions are always arrived by some sort of debate and consensus. So it forms an important part of our judiciary, and one can almost call it a pulse check for the nation. Recently, it was utilized during the Presidential Commission of Inquiry into the review of the country's constitution. So, I mean, I know I'm going to be doing a lot of the talking, but I'd like for us to treat this gathering in the similar trajectory that I've sort of observed throughout the day, which is active dialogue and sharing of ideas and perspectives and feedback. So regarding our conversation today, I'll be providing perspectives, some level of anecdotes, and highlighting gaps within the policy framework that govern the development and growth of the creative sector in the African continent. I will be referring and referencing various studies like the Brookings Institute Africa Growth Initiative Foresight Africa Report 2023 report, the Futures Report 2021 on AFCFTA, the Africa Soft Power report from 2022, just to name a few. And then that will lead us to an evening of fashion and dance, as I've heard. And again, I wish I could be physically there, but my schedule just did not allow. But first, before I proceed, I'd like to sort of share my story and be a little bit vulnerable, and why this moment is a full circle moment for me. I had quite an unfortunate education journey, in that I was always a student who was highly artistic, leaning towards the arts, and subjects like maths and sciences were such a challenge for me. A few times, teachers told me that I was not intelligent, and usually the slower students were encouraged to pursue the arts. So if you can't do the maths and sciences, oh, let's chuck them within the more artistic, expressive subjects. And it was there that I found refuge in drama and music and visual arts. The museums and the galleries, for me, truly became centers for contextualized knowledge production and for learning about myself and the world around me. So primary and high school were quite a demoralizing experience for me. But it was quite later in my tertiary years that I discovered various theories like Paul Lefre's critical consciousness theory, like Dr. Benoit mentioned Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, Jean Piaget's cognitive development theories, that really then assisted me in situating myself and my life's purpose. Because sometimes I do feel like the people who want to change the world or the education system are the people for which the education system worked for them. They were number one in class, and some of us who were periodically at the bottom of the class were never or seemingly can never be factored in or absorbed into change management. I usually find the dissonance lies there quite strongly. So this, of course, fueled my life's purpose in my studies and the work that I do within the creative sector currently at Oralwapi, with projects, varying projects with various institutions like the Botswana Qualifications Authority, our central bank, the Bank of Botswana. I heard some banter about central banks earlier, and their corporate art collection. And then I'm part of the founding board members of the National Arts Council of Botswana. So building the policy and building a parastatal from scratch in terms of the governance structures is something that was quite a steep learning curve, but profoundly fulfilling work. And then I do work with the Harvard Center for African Studies in terms of development of their various initiatives at board level, and collaborating once again with what I would like to term high net worth visual artists within the continent, like Nelson Makamo, whose work has been on the cover of Time magazine, and Victor Hikemono, and so on. So at Oralwapi, we look at ways of creating and strengthening that very important cyclical relationship between academia, private sector, and public sector, where the creative economy is concerned. I'm quite obsessed with definitions, and I would define the creative economy as the total market impact of businesses and individuals involved in producing cultural and artistic goods and services. So it encompasses various avenues like education, art, performing arts, design, visual arts, architecture. Anything that falls within those realms is considered part of the creative economy. Our focus at Oralwapi specifically on art curation, skills development, and again, that robust exposure to then the continental and global capital markets and audiences through the strong networks we've built throughout the years. So yeah, Oralwapi is a curatorial consultancy that then facilitates that global circulation of the diversified pedagogies, the latest research within the creative economy, with a focus on the visual arts, and then how private and public sector entities can scale that research through best practices. I believe that real investment, real financial, social investment is not just about handouts. It's not just about aid. It is about that sustainable capital injection, various elements of market engagement, utility of aptitude, then for quantifiable and well-defined and well-measured results with monitoring and evaluation structures, which are things that have been quite tricky within the creative economy. Just to focus on the visual arts and to give sort of a lay of the land in terms of what's happening in the African continent, there's been sort of several high-profile developments that have focused the international attention, for example, on the African visual arts, both historic in terms of modern art and contemporary, including its collection, its curation, the status of museums, with an intensity that has not been seen before. There was mention of Togo earlier, where we've got the Palais de Lomé. We've got various institutions, museums in Kenya, at the Rift Valley, in Morocco, in South Africa, private and public museums that are just sort of sprouting up, in Benin, at Emoa. And it's quite an exciting intensity that I said, as we've never really quite seen this in the past in the African continent. In the arena of historic arts, for example, the Benin Dialogue Group held its 6th meeting back in 2019 to discuss the royal arts of Benin that was stolen during the British invasion of that particular kingdom in 1897. Including the creation of the museum that I mentioned in Benin City, that is quite at an advanced stage. David RJ is behind the architecture of that. Perhaps more profoundly, on November 28th, in a packed university hall, the still president of the Republic of France, Emmanuel Macron, announced his desire to see within the next 5 years, it's been 5 years, conditions put in place to facilitate what he referred to as the temporary or definitive restitution of African cultural heritage back to the continent. And then following this pronouncement, he commissioned 2 scholars to author a report that was titled The Restitution of Africa's Cultural Heritage Towards a New Relational Ethics, that was translated by Professor Burke. And since that publication was made public, it has, sparked a widespread interest in the inventory of what I refer to as African cultural objects held in Western museums, and how to put in place infrastructures for their return. Considering that a huge portion of African material cultural legacy of sub-Saharan Africa from the colonial period is actually housed outside of Africa, and for a continent where 60% of its population, the numbers were tossed around, are under the age of 35, it remains crucial for Africans to have access to these facets of their own culture, their own creativity and spirituality from other eras that certainly have evolved since, but where knowledge and recognition can no longer be merely reserved for those who are residing in Western countries, or for those who count themselves among part of the African diaspora living in Europe. I experienced the same sort of tennis ball hitting me in the face moment when I was living in Boston, visiting the museum in Boston and seeing these cultural artifacts for the first time. And I had to cross the ocean for that to happen. These initiatives and others have generated, various academic conferences on issues, layered issues that have included restitution, reparations, collection, sharing, and circulation, the state of African curatorial practice globally and on the continent, the call for the restitution of cultural artifacts has now been extended to human remains and fossils. I can give you an example with Botswana. It was after the Olympics, I believe, in Barcelona, where one of our human remains, we called it El Negro, was repatriated to Botswana. Subsequently, unfortunately, as more research was done, we found out those human remains were actually buried in the wrong area. It was the individual was originally from South Africa, and not Botswana. As part of this globalism, contemporary artists from Africa are also represented internationally by galleries And their work is increasingly a focus of exhibitions. This is more on a positive front, but biennales are likewise celebrating Africa. In 2015, we had the Venice Biennale. The most prominent of these was curated by a Nigerian curator, Okwi Enezwa, may his soul rest in peace. And he was lauded for its inclusion of artists from the continent. In 2019, the Ghana Pavilion opened for the first time to rave reviews. And that was an exhibition that paired established artist Anatui with much more younger artists. Biennales are also sort of really becoming popular and are flourishing now on the African continent as well, in cities like Bamako and Dakar, Lagos, Marrakesh. And recently, we obviously know that Beni will be represented at the Venice Biennale also for the first time. They're making their debut, and platforms like that are really quite important. Commercial art fairs as well are now becoming the norm, with representation of African galleries. This is even more pertinent with Africa-focused art fairs like 154, which has its yearly editions in London, in Marrakesh, and in New York. We just recently came back from Cape Town Art Fair, which is the biggest art fair in the continent, that had 93 galleries that are international and within Africa that are focused on selling contemporary African art. In February 2019, our client, Nelson Makamo, who is a South African visual artist, his work graced the cover of Time magazine's Optimist issue, which was guest edited by filmmaker Ava DuVernay. So along with this intensification of global interest in the status of Africa's cultural heritage, and its contemporary African artistic practice, also comes a growing call for continent-wide dialogue around the visual arts, around archiving, around curatorial practice, conceptual strategies, art criticism, cultural heritage protection, the differences in economic resources, the challenge of physical infrastructure that was alluded to earlier, cultural heritage protection, electricity and electronic bandwidth, difficulties of travel within African nation, and a range of other approaches to advanced arts education and curatorial training. All of these present challenges for nurturing, once again, a robust network for the visual arts and for arts that is Africa-based. In many countries, there's also a schism between museums, which tend to house collections of historic arts, and galleries and art centers, which showcase contemporary art. So the focus of African art on independence was to reimagine the pre-colonial African aesthetic to artistic consciousness that had been disrupted by colonial rule. There's various sort of training institutions and programs that have emerged on the continent for artists and curators that explore new models of curation. Various cultural institutions have trained, in some instances, over 1,200 professionals from some 26 sub-Saharan countries. University art and curation programs have undergone innovative change in the last couple of decades, including departments of painting and sculpture at the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. The University of Western Cape is also doing some really interesting Africa-centered program in museum and heritage studies. We had much more private sector initiatives by the incredible BC Silva, may her soul rest in peace, who was the founder of the Center for Contemporary Art in Lagos. We've got sessions of the Raw Academy, sponsored by the Raw Material Company, which was founded by the incredible Koyo Kuyo, who's the director currently of Zeitz Moga. So these initiatives have brought to the fore the study of curatorial thought and practice, and have really centered and brought to the forefront the future of Africa-based curatorial practice. So for us, I mean, that was more of like a lay of the land of what's happening in the continent, both in terms of its infrastructure, intellectual and physical infrastructure. But at Oral Wapi in Botswana, according to our research, a well-managed, highly actualized creative sector could contribute up to 8% of Botswana's GDP. And how we feel like this goal can be achieved and actualized is through a complete shift in culture, mindset, and ultimately practice. The shift, and I aggressively believe this must be stewarded by artists as policymakers, artists as researchers, artists as archivists, as educators, and as entrepreneurs. That would mean us assuming the responsibility, not just of the vision itself, but then its stellar execution and intentional communication through platforms like this. I'm of the belief that corporate companies themselves can no longer afford and are frankly not interested in injecting untold sums of money into a black hole of talent that is in and of itself quite disorganized and fragmented and not supported by strong governance frameworks and policies. So it's absolutely paramount for local artists, and this also is quite relevant to other African countries, to learn to be just a more expansive, and anything else could be seen as malignant. So Oral Wapi for us really then is the conduit between the practitioners, the market, and sponsors, ultimately for those revenue purposes. And we, like many countries, are moving away from the dependency on diamonds, because we know that there's a strong economic argument for the arts. With a population of 2 million, the Africa Free Trade Agreement and greater access to those markets becomes quite fundamental to countries like Botswana, Mauritius, Lesotho, Namibia, Eswatini, Seychelles, Cape Verde, which was mentioned earlier, who actually routinely top various indexy reports on the continent. There's a sense in which at times, when we think of Africa, we only think of the big five, but interestingly, it's sometimes the smaller, more well-managed countries that are starting to poke their heads out, so to speak, as investment hubs that are politically and socially more stable. Right now, as of last month, people from Namibia and Botswana, for example, no longer require passports to travel between each country, which is quite a win for the Africa Free Trade movement and its realization within the African continent. I'd just like to share some aspects of a report that was commissioned by an entity called the Africa No Filter entity. They commissioned a report called the Africa Soft Power: Can Africa's Creativity Transform the Continent? Report, which explored young Africans' perception about the relevance of creativity in their lives and in the continent's development primarily. More reports like this need to be commissioned, that are far-reaching, because as we know, the continent is quite huge and quite complex. One of the key findings of this report showed that although a majority of the respondents, about 85% of them, believe that arts and culture were an important part of society, only a few supported the sector, with as many as, I believe it was 78%, confessing that they spend nothing or very little on arts or cultural pastimes, as they called it. So going back to education, they also don't read much African literature. And a few of the respondents saw, they did see the creative sector as a viable career opportunity. The findings were concerning, given, again, the growing attention on the creative and cultural industries, because the creative and cultural industries are quite a low barrier entry sector that can absorb much of Africa's youthful talent. The continent's leading artists are making their mark, your Davidos, your WizKids, yet Africans themselves are often not their biggest source of that much needed revenue. So the resulting report of the Africa Soft Power, they interviewed 4,500 people aged between 18 and 35, which is what is referred to as the youth demographic in Africa, to find out what they think about the role of arts and culture in society. So the specimens were taken from Egypt, Morocco, North Africa, Ghana, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, West Africa, Kenya, Uganda, East Africa, and then South Africa and Zimbabwe in Southern Africa. The findings cover the creative sector, including whether youth respondents thought their governments were doing enough to support the creative industries, their perception of the creative industries, and is it successful, is it not? And some of the key findings were that yes, arts and culture is important. In all 9 countries where the youth were polled, more than 85% of respondents believed that arts and culture were an important part of society. So that's quite a strong result. They believe that creatives are influential and admired. I believe an average of 82% of all respected and admired creatives in their country. So that's great, again, for raising the gravitas of an otherwise somewhat undermined sector. The third was that young Africans did not believe that it was possible to make a good living from the creative sector. Only 4% respondents worked actually within the creative sector, which again highlights the high informal rate that the sector is operating in. The fourth one was proving that Africa is a market for creative content. Young Africans are consuming African films equally, just as much as the US or international content. Most respondents watched films every week, whether it be African local films, 67%, or international US market films, which is 66%. And amongst respondents who watched between 1 or 7 films, slightly more had watched local African movies than international movies. So film continues to be quite a popular or the most appreciated creative platform. Of all the art forms, respondents were most likely to have watched a film, either local or international. African writers are not writing for African audiences. That was one of the results. And worryingly, many African youth are not reading for pleasure. So hardly any of the respondents had read a book in the month before the interview. A scary figure, 75%, had not read any international authors and 71% had not read any African authors. And again, this indicates that African authors are not attracting the African youth demographic. Respondents in terms of economic output were not spending money on creative outputs. Although respondents believe that the arts and culture, 85% of them were an important part of society, few were spending to support the sector. Even in terms of just pastimes, very little economic engagement in terms of exchanges of money were being made. With regards to business and entrepreneurship, are still seen as the main sort of money makers. Nearly half of the respondents, 48%, believe that a traditional career in sports was seen to be more lucrative than a career in the creative industries. 23% of respondents felt like they would make more money from football, from basketball, compared to 13% who opted for music and film. And interestingly, of respondents from Cote d'Ivoire, 45% believe sport was more lucrative, South Africa 22%, and Kenya 19% perceived social media influencers to be earning more than creatives. I'm wrapping up now, but the connection of the creative economy as a tool for economic development is one that through the study is really quite yet to be realized, certainly in terms of data development that then informs policy. The Brookings Institute, I remember in January, launched their Foresight Africa report, which aimed to capture the top priorities for the African region in the year ahead as we prepare for increasing global turbulence, and mentions, the issues like climate change, education, urbanization, economic recovery and growth, food security. And whilst this does fundamentally highlight the challenges, which are important, reports like the Futures Report 2021 then highlights solutions for economic growth and recovery through the robust continental higher quality trade that has been the through line of today's conversation. I'm sure you all know about this report. It is a joint publication between the United Nations Development Office and then AFC FTA Secretariat that highlights that without trade and structural change, the African continent is less likely to address the persistent challenges highlighted in the Brookings report, such as poverty, unemployment, the economic marginalization of women and youth, of whom actually a significant number operate within the creative sector and agriculture. It is such an important a tool because it's a real-time, rapid analysis on what we practically mean when we talk about the One Africa market, with the preferential market being that particular policy. Applying a methodological assessment to the tariff and services offers that have been exchanged within the AFCFTA state parties, it identifies the 10 value chains that constitute some of the areas in which investment decisions could be made, given the sort of complexities and contours of the dream of the One Africa market. So the value chains include automotives, leather, mobile financial services, pharmaceuticals, textile, and then fundamentally the cultural and creative industries. With this product, obviously, I think it's been a discussion for today. Government officials can target which sectors consist of opportunities for their nation's entry into this one Africa market, creating targeted trade capacity building programs that can then strengthen exporter readiness. Businesses like Ora Luapi, like myself, are also then in a better place to make sound decisions of where to invest and where to seize these one Africa market opportunities. And those areas were further, and those areas where further improvements need to be made are also pointed out to create, again, stronger chances of that made in Africa revolution. In my travels, there've been exciting progress made within countries like Eswatini, South Africa, Seychelles, Egypt, and so on. Countries such as Mali, Mozambique, Rwanda, Zambia have significant production and consumption of cultural products. I mean, these include music, dance, crafts, visual arts. And in 2020, actually, the creative industries accounted for about 2.5% of total employment within the Zambian economy alone, and accounted for 0.04% of exports and 1% of imports, growing steadily since 2011. Nollywood, I'm wrapping up, it's such a long presentation, but Nollywood is another example, which is the second largest employer of Nigeria, with 300,000 direct employees. South Africa accounted for a 16.5 billion annual turnover generated by the visual arts. There was a report that came out in January that 60% of the South African labor force get up and work primarily for the creative and cultural institutes. Kenya's creative industries generated 85 billion in 2013. The Mozambique, the publishing sector leads the exports of creative goods. It's really quite an exciting time, even though there are challenges within the labor sector, with child labor being at the forefront. Just to wrap up, I know it's been quite numbers being thrown around, but with regards to specific policies that regulate the cultural and creative economy, they need to be developed with sort of 7 main benefits in mind, which is number 1, regulating the creative economy from upstream to downstream. Number 2, provision of incentives for creative economy practitioners. Number 3, capacity building for creative economy practitioners. Establishment of public service agencies in the field of creative economies, something that is quite strongly needed in terms of governance and infrastructure. Protection of intellectual property is something that is absolutely fundamental with the digital world in which we live in now. Higher provision of creative economy infrastructure, and even within the trade agreements, a creative economy master plan of some sort that is general to all 54 countries. I think that's going to be quite difficult. Again, just to wrap up, I just see my vision for Ora Luapi is to foster what I believe is a 21st century multi-tiered interdisciplinary artist who doesn't just create art, but transcends all levels of the relevant spheres of today's world. So politics, history, philosophy, global warming, economics, trade. We need more creative minds in the boardrooms. We need more creative people building those governance structures and informing the lawyers and the policymakers in terms of the practical implications of what it is that they're forming. I'm going to stop there, but I just believe that the potential for the creative economy in Africa is quite enormous. We need more entrepreneurs. We need more private sector investment to bolster this energy. I'd like to ask everybody who's present to please support African art. Please support African fashion. Please buy African publications. Listen to African music. Go view African films. I recently watched one by Akino Motoso. That was quite incredible. I'm going to be quite cheeky and say, you know, we've been talking about ways in which all 54 countries can trade. You know, every conference that I attend, a Zambian is dating a Nigerian, Nigerian is dating a Ghanaian. So there's a sense in which on the ground, the trade is happening through love. And it's really just about the elders catching up in terms of the political will to really get things happening. But we don't necessarily need to wait for them. I feel like the youth are certainly have the energy to build a private sector that can propel Africa's creative industries forward. I hope that was not too long. Thank you so much again for having me. And yeah, I'll leave it to the team. Unfortunately, I have to go because I have to be up in 3 hours. But thank you so much to the Africa Forum for having me.
Thank you so much, Alejandro, for this. Yeah. Thank you so much for this very insightful keynote address. Your accomplishments as an artist as well as an entrepreneur are very inspiring.
And also, this is Kiki Doze. I wanted to address you directly and thank you for that very comprehensive, you know, analysis of the creative industry market in Africa. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
What keep you up any longer? I know in Botswana it's way past United Nations one. Yeah. So anyway, coming up next, we have Obioma Fashion. So Obioma Fashion is a fashion company that mixes fashion, African fashion with Western fashion. It's based in Brooklyn, New York. The company is co-owned by fashion entrepreneur Mr. Emeka Anyadiegu, who earned his BA in economics from DePaul University in Chicago and his MA in international economics from Howard University. Obioma fashion clothes are designed in America. They are made in Nigeria and they are available worldwide. I am very happy to tell you all that I am wearing a dress from obviously Obioma Fashion. From their brand new collection. And we have Mr. Emeka Anyadiegu online via Zoom, and he's going to speak and give us a few remarks. Please join me in welcoming him. If you could please start your video so we can all see you. Mr. Emeka Anyadiegu, are you there?
My name is Emeka Anyadiegu, and I am the managing director of Obioma Fashion. We're a fashion brand. We mix West African fabrics and African fabrics with Western styles. So we have dresses, blazers, joggers, pants, shirts, shorts, and crop tops, different unique pieces, all made with fair trade in Nigeria. And we sell globally. We make clothes for dance teams as well. We make merchandise for college organizations. So we're a unique fashion brand that loves promoting African fashion. We love promoting the vibrant fabrics. And we have women's wear, men's wear, and accessories. You can find us on Instagram at myobioma, OBIOMA. Same on TikTok and Twitter. Then Pinterest and Facebook, we are Obioma Fashion, OBIOMA Fashion. And we love fashion, we love clothes, we love the fabrics, we love just African culture and let's promote it to the globe. And also, I am the son of Dean Edozie, Dean Rita Edozie. Thank you very much, Dr. Edozie. Appreciate you for inviting me with your group for your show. And we've been working with you for the past couple of years. I appreciate Mom for helping me out for everything.
We love you.
Love you too. So my Instagram handle is MyObioma, 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 MyObioma.
Wonderful. Maybe we can have some music as we wait for the models to come. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much to the models, Rebecca, Chantel, and Martin. That was wonderful. That was awesome. And the music also. Oh my God, I don't know about you guys, but I really enjoyed myself. So I don't know if Emeka is still there. There are people asking for your Instagram handle. If you could please put your details on the chat box, on the Zoom chat box. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm still here. I'll put it in the chat. Yep. MyObioma, yep.
Okay, while Emeka goes ahead to put the details on the chat box, we shall introduce the next entertainment set. We are going to have ASU students Afrobeat dance. So it's going to be our pleasure to invite the Afrobeat dance by the ASC students. Yeah. So the African Student Union was formed to unify African students and mobilize the University of Massachusetts hosted community towards a substantive discussion of the continent, its possibilities, and its pitfalls. It also aims to influence the discourse on Africa at UMB and the community. The union has an open membership to all students and faculty of UMB, irrespective of race, color, religion, gender, and sexual orientation. This is an amazing group of young and talented African students and African who are people who also associate with Africa in every respect. I will therefore ask that the ASU students Afrobeat dance should come forward to the stage and present their dance. Beautiful souls, beautiful presenters, and amazing dancers. Yeah, let's go. I tell you one thing about this house, right? It is a combination of cultural kind of orientation and living creative industry. So this is a mix from the African to the world. It's absolutely beautiful. It's amazing.
Muito fácil, então mostrar, ele,
It's absolutely amazing. It's wonderful. Pleasurable to the heart. So, it's beautiful. Beautiful sex, beautiful. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you for your beliefs, for your land. Okay. I, my first statement was that the future is Africa. When I mean the future is Africa, I can say it here. From the creative industry, from every aspect of our life as a continent and as a people, we have potentials that can take the world by surprise. We've seen it here all. From morning, from the noon to this period, we've seen manifestation of so high impact intellectuals to creativity of our young generation. So the world is waiting for Africa, and we must develop our potentials to take the world, by surprise and take charge and decide our position in the world stage. Oh, the girls finished dancing. I think we shall give like 5 minutes, DJ, 5 minutes for everybody. We'll be sitting down. Some of my professors used to teach us ontology and epistemology. So we will be going through academic, rigor, listening and talking and asking questions and answering questions. Can we please just stand up for 5 minutes, shake your body to African rains music. And I believe definitely that after these 5 minutes, you give some testimony.
I support that message. Just as we are concluding the event, after this we'll have food, networking, more music. But as Augustine said, for 5 minutes, let's put a dance song and invite everybody who would like to stand up and dance.